911, what's your emergency?
It's Sophie! The dolphin grabbed her! She's under the water, she's not coming up!
Help is on the way, stay on the line.
The call ended, but it was too late. They called it the Ocean Dream, a performance of grace and wonder, where humans and dolphins danced in harmony under stadium lights. Children clapped, cameras flashed, trainers smiled. And in the center of it all, Sophie Lane stood with her hand outstretched, waiting for the leap she had guided 1,000 times before. But dreams, when forced, can shatter. And beneath the surface of applause, something else had been building. Exhaustion. Silence. A body pushed beyond its limits. A warning ignored. The kind of tragedy that doesn't arrive with thunder, but with a whisper. A quiet gasp between the cheers. Aeris wasn't just a performer. She was a living being. Intelligent, sensitive, tired. And when her body could no longer carry the weight of expectation, the world watched as something beautiful broke. This isn't a story about aggression. It's about pressure, about the cost of pretending nature will bend forever, and about a trainer who saw it coming and wasn't heard in time. Before we begin, we want to hear from you. Do you think animal performances still have a place in today's world? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because this story isn't just one to remember, it's one to question. They said Aeris was the pride of the park. For nearly a decade, the sleek bottlenose dolphin had danced through hoops, leapt into spotlights, and brought wide-eyed children to their feet with every glistening spin. She was the finale, the star, the reason families stayed until the last minute of every show. But no one noticed when her movements began to slow, when her jumps no longer soared, and her eyes, once bright with curiosity, turned dull and distant. Sophie Lane noticed. She always did. At 29, Sophie wasn't just a trainer. She was Aeris's partner, her confidant, the steady presence behind every performance. Where others saw tricks, Sophie saw effort, fatigue, quiet pleas. She had watched Aeris grow from a vibrant adolescent into a performer molded by repetition and expectation. And now, she was watching her fade. It had been a brutal week. 11 shows in 7 days, music blaring, lights flashing, commands flying through headsets. Each morning, Aeris surfaced slower. She hesitated at cues. One afternoon, she refused to breach entirely, instead circling the tank aimlessly, as if trying to find a place to hide. Sophie brought it up during the staff meeting, her voice steady but urgent. "She's not lazy," she said. "She's exhausted. She needs rest." Victor Hale, the park's operations manager, didn't even look up from his clipboard. "We've got sold-out shows through the weekend," he replied flatly. "If she's still swimming, she's still performing." The room went silent. Sophie knew better than to argue. She had seen what happened to others who raised concerns. Quietly reassigned, their rotations cut, their warnings ignored. She returned to the pool, knelt by the water's edge, and watched Aeris surface beside her, barely lifting her head above the waves. "I'm sorry," Sophie whispered. That night, Aeris refused her final feed. Her breathing was shallow. Her dorsal fin, usually upright and strong, curved slightly left, a subtle but unmistakable sign of stress. Sophie documented it all, filed the report, and left a note in Victor's inbox requesting the Dolphin be pulled from the next day's lineup. The note was never answered. In the stillness of the pool, beneath the surface smiles and rehearsed joy, something was unraveling. A thread pulled too tight, a body pushed too far. Sophie could feel it, like a whisper just out of reach. She didn't know it then, but the unraveling had already begun, and it would not stop until something, or someone, broke. The night before the tragedy, the park was unusually quiet. Most of the staff had gone home, The music had faded, and the stadium lights cast long shadows over the pool. But Sophie stayed behind. She stood alone by the edge of Aeris's tank, watching the Dolphin drift listlessly through the water. There was no playfulness left in her movements, just fatigue. Every breath felt heavy, every dive slower than the last. She didn't eat again, Sophie told the on-call vet, her voice edged with worry. She didn't respond to tactile cues, and her tail flutters are irregular. The vet nodded, jotting something down. But before Sophie could say more, Victor Hale arrived. He walked in briskly, phone still in hand, his voice sharp with impatience. "We can't have her missing tomorrow's finale," he said flatly. "It's our biggest crowd of the season." Sophie turned to him, stunned. "She's not ready. She's barely moving. She needs to rest, Victor." But he had already turned to the vet. "Administer the stimulant," he ordered. Sophie's heart dropped. "No, absolutely not. That's not recovery. That's forcing her beyond her limit. You're masking a problem, not solving it." Victor didn't flinch. "It's a mild dose. It'll boost alertness and reduce fatigue. She'll be fine for 20 minutes. That's all I need." "All you need," Sophie repeated, the words bitter in her throat. "What about what she needs?" There was no reply, just a nod from Victor, and within minutes, a syringe was prepared. Sophie stood frozen as the needle pierced Aeris's skin. The Dolphin flinched, then stilled. The surface of the water rippled outward. A quiet betrayal, a silent line crossed. Afterward, Sophie sat on the stadium steps, staring at the empty seats that would be filled by cheers tomorrow. Behind her, Aeris began swimming faster, her movements sharper, more responsive. But they weren't natural. They were mechanical, like something inside her had been overwritten. Sophie felt a chill crawl up her spine. It wasn't pride, it wasn't relief, it was dread. "This isn't her," she whispered to no one. But it didn't matter. The show would go on, and somewhere in the stillness of that chemically driven swim, the delicate trust between trainer and animal began to fracture. Not with a roar, but with a whisper. And no one, not even Sophie, could undo what had been set in motion. The morning arrived with cruel clarity. Bright skies, crisp air, and an expectant crowd already filling the amphitheater. It was the kind of day marketing teams dreamed of. Perfect weather, full seats, and families holding cotton candy and smartphones, ready to be amazed. But behind the stage, Sophie moved like a ghost, her thoughts heavy and her instincts screaming. Aeris floated near the surface, her body still, eyes vacant. The stimulant had worn off. Whatever flicker of energy it had given her last night had vanished, leaving only a deeper exhaustion in its place. Sophie crouched by the tank and whispered her name. The Dolphin blinked once, then sank beneath the surface. "She's not ready," Sophie muttered under her breath. But no one was listening. At exactly 11:00 a.m., the music boomed. Curtains drew back, spotlights hit the water. Sophie stepped onto the platform, her wetsuit zipped tight, headset secured, smile forced. Aeris breached on cue, sending a wave over the front row. The audience cheered, unaware of the trembling in Sophie's hands. The routine began. Signals, flips, synchronized twirls. On the surface, it all looked seamless, but beneath it, cracks were forming. Aeris hesitated on a jump. She missed a spin. Her breathing grew uneven, her movements erratic. Sophie adjusted, masked it with extra gestures, calming tones, treats she knew wouldn't be accepted. The moment of trust was approaching. The glide. A maneuver where Sophie and Aeris would swim side by side, inches apart. It had always been their signature, a celebration of connection. Sophie gave the signal. Aeris didn't respond. Instead, she turned abruptly, circling the tank with increasing speed. Her tail slapped the surface hard, once, twice, echoing like thunder through the theater. The audience fell quiet. Sophie stepped back, instinctively lowering her hand. She didn't know what Aeris was trying to say. But deep down, something twisted inside her. This wasn't part of the routine, and for the first time in years, she was afraid. It happened in a heartbeat, and yet, somehow, time stretched around it. Sophie had barely taken a step forward, trying to regain Aeris's focus, when the dolphin lunged upward from the water, not with grace, but with panic. Her body twisted midair, the usual elegance gone. She landed sideways, a sharp, heavy splash that rocked the platform. The sound alone sent ripples through the audience. Aeris didn't rise again right away. She drifted beneath the surface, just out of sight, as if suspended in some private storm. Sophie knelt, searching the water, whispering her name through the mic, soft, measured, pleading. The crowd grew tense. What was this? An improvised trick? A malfunction? A moment of play? Then Aeris surged from the depths, fast, frantic, and slammed against the platform edge. Her rostrum struck Sophie in the ribs, knocking her backward. Before she could react, before the safety crew could move, Aeris opened her mouth and latched onto Sophie's arm, not with malice, but with desperate force. The moment her body was pulled into the water, a collective gasp rose from the stands. At first, it still looked like a show, a twist, a spin, a splash. But beneath the water, chaos bloomed. Aeris thrashed violently, dragging Sophie deeper and deeper. The movements weren't coordinated. They were erratic, fueled by something broken. Neurological distress, panic, a chemical confusion. Sophie fought. She kicked, signaled, tried every calming command she knew by heart. None of it reached Aeris. Above water, trainers shouted emergency codes. A red flag was raised. Underwater speakers blared a distress tone. Barriers were deployed. Nothing worked. Aeris was unresponsive to every tactic, deaf to the world outside her own unraveling. 2 minutes passed, then 3. Aeris surfaced. Sophie's body still clenched in her jaws. Blood trailed behind them. The crowd began to scream. Parents covered their children's eyes. Security ushered people toward the exits. Somewhere in the chaos, a whistle blew, and a net dropped into the water. But it was too late. Aeris dove again, dragging Sophie under. This time, there was no struggle. By the time the medical team reached the edge of the pool, Aeris had released her. Sophie floated motionless, her wetsuit torn, her face pale beneath the water's shimmer. Rescuers pulled her out. CPR began immediately. Someone called for an ambulance, but Sophie never opened her eyes again. She was pronounced dead at 11:19 a.m., 7 minutes. That's all it took to turn a celebrated partnership into a catastrophe, to turn applause into sirens, to silence a voice that had spent years speaking for the voiceless. The show had ended, and something far darker had taken its place. News spread faster than the sirens. By noon, the headlines were already climbing search engines. Trainer killed during Dolphin show. Tragedy at Coral Vista Marine Park. Star Dolphin turns deadly. But the truth wasn't that simple. It never is. Backstage, the park descended into chaos. Performances were canceled. Staff stood in shock. Some crying, others frozen. The medical bay was sealed. Sophie's locker remained untouched. Her coffee still warm. Her notes from the night before still folded neatly beside a bag of treats, labeled "For Aeris." Victor Hale held a press conference before sunset. With practiced sorrow, he read from a prepared statement. "We are deeply saddened by the loss of our beloved trainer, Sophie Lane. She was a treasured member of our team, and our thoughts are with her family." He said nothing of the stimulant, nothing of the ignored warnings, nothing of the reports Sophie had filed, documenting Aeris's decline, her refusal to eat, her missed cues. but whispers began to circulate. A junior handler came forward, anonymously at first, revealing that Sophie had pleaded for Aeris to be pulled from rotation, that she had protested the injection, that Victor had overridden her objections for the sake of a sold-out show. Then came the leak. Security footage from the night before, grainy, time-stamped, showed Victor instructing the vet to proceed with the injection. Sophie's face was visible in the corner, tense and pale, her arms crossed as the needle entered Aeris's side. Public outrage ignited. Social media erupted with hashtags toward justice for Sophie. She got free Aeris. She got performances, are not peace. Protesters gathered at the gates of Coral Vista. Former trainers spoke out. Animal welfare organizations demanded investigations. The pressure was immediate, unrelenting, and loud. But perhaps the most haunting silence came from the tank itself. Aeris floated alone, refusing food, unresponsive to caretakers. The Dolphin, who once soared through choreographed waves, now drifted as if waiting for someone who would never return. And for those who had once watched Sophie and Aeris in awe, a single question began to take root. Was this really an accident, or the inevitable result of a system built to silence struggle in the name of spectacle? The truth, it seemed, was no longer just beneath the surface. It had risen, and it demanded to be heard. Coral Vista Marine Park tried to move on, but the world didn't let it. In the days that followed, Sophie Lane's death became more than just a headline. It became a reckoning. Candlelit vigils bloomed outside the park gates, where flowers wilted beneath signs that read, "She tried to save her," and "Dolphins aren't props." News anchors debated ethics. Legislators called for emergency hearings. And through it all, the truth grew harder to bury. Investigations were launched. The Department of Wildlife Welfare demanded full transparency. Internal documents surfaced. Memos Sophie had written weeks before her death, urging management to revise Aeris's schedule. Medical reports showed irregularities in Aeris's stress hormones. Most damning of all was the drug report. The injection contained a stimulant never approved for marine mammals. It had been used off-record, without oversight. Victor Hale was placed on administrative leave. But for many, that wasn't enough. The conversation had shifted, no longer about a single trainer or even one park. It was about an entire industry, about the normalization of pushing animals and humans past their limits to meet entertainment quotas, about what we ask from creatures that never agreed to perform in the first place. Former trainers from other facilities came forward with eerily similar stories. Ignored reports, punished dissent, dangerous shortcuts. The pattern was undeniable. Meanwhile, Aeris remained in isolation. Her behavior had changed. She refused to interact. She ignored familiar voices. Some days, she wouldn't surface for hours. The park labeled her condition trauma-related fatigue. But those who had worked closely with her called it something else: grief. And Sophie's family? They didn't demand vengeance. They demanded change. They appeared on talk shows, not to assign blame, but to ask a simple question. If Sophie died trying to protect the animal she loved, will we finally listen to what that love was warning us about? Because for the first time, the world was watching. And silence was no longer an option. The water no longer shimmered with joy. It sat still, quiet, like it was mourning. Weeks had passed since the tragedy, but Coral Vista Marine Park hadn't recovered. The stadium remained empty. The music had stopped. Every seat stood untouched. Every sign faded under the sun. The silence felt heavier than applause ever had. Aeris drifted alone in her tank. Gone were the spins, the leaps, the bright-eyed glances she once shared with Sophie. Now, she barely moved. Some days, she floated near the glass, staring at her reflection as if waiting for it to speak. Trainers tried to engage her, but she didn't respond. Her appetite remained inconsistent. There were no signs of aggression, only fatigue, deep and hollow. Park officials called it a standard behavioral lull. But the staff knew better. Aeris was grieving. Sophie's absence lingered in every corner of the facility. Her locker was untouched. Her headset still hung on its hook. A scribbled note on her clipboard read, "Hydration first. Always." It hadn't been erased. No one had the heart to. Outside, change had begun. Sophie's family launched the Sophie Lane Foundation, a voice for animals and the people who care for them. Donations came quickly, from strangers, from scientists, from former trainers who had long remained silent. Their mission was simple: education, regulation, and compassion. Coral Vista, once proud of its record-breaking attendance, now faced scrutiny. Government agencies demanded reform. Animal welfare groups called for the park's closure. What once felt like spectacle now felt like a warning, ignored for too long. And Aeris? She was moved. No longer a performer, she was relocated to a protected ocean sanctuary. A place without crowds, without lights, without expectations. There, she swam slowly, tracing natural tides for the first time in years. Some say she looked back, some say she didn't. But what remains is not just the loss. It's the memory of trust broken, and the hope that from it, something better might begin. Sophie Lane didn't die because she was reckless. She died because she believed, deeply, stubbornly, that compassion could coexist with control. That if she listened hard enough, cared deeply enough, she could bridge the space between instinct and obedience, between wildness and routine, between Aeris and the world that demanded she perform. But nature doesn't always yield to love. And when we ignore its warnings, no matter how softly they speak, the consequences come. Not in rage, but in inevitability. Sophie's story is not just about one dolphin or one trainer. It's about a system that rewards silence over safety, spectacle over soul. It's about the quiet cost of pushing too far for too long. And it's about the people, like Sophie, who try to hold the line, even when it breaks beneath them. Aeris now swims in freedom, far from the flashbulbs and forced routines. But the ripple Sophie left behind continues, in every protest sign, in every bill proposed, in every child who now asks, why was she made to perform at all? Her death wasn't the end, it was the question. And it's one we all have to answer. If Sophie's story moved you, we want to hear from you. Do you believe animals like Aeris belong in performance? Or is it time to redefine what connection really means? Leave a comment below. Let your voice be part of the conversation. Because silence now is no longer an excuse.